Did you know the Bible was changed? Recently, I've seen a lot of Muslim kind of apologists who will show Bibles and they're like, look, Christians took out this part of the Bible. I have this really old Bible. And they'll have like an old Bible from like the 1800s. For me, that's not an old Bible as an Armenian. I've seen a lot of older stuff, right? So we translated the Bible into Armenian in the 400s, in the 5th century, created an alphabet to translate the Bible into Armenian. And so when I look at that stuff, I go, oh, come on, like seriously, like it's so easy to compare that and see whether they took anything out or not. We can go back and look at it. So tell us what's going on in the culture, what your observations are, and what's maybe a wise way Christians can deal with these sorts of things, like popularized stuff. I'm not talking about technical scholarly stuff yet.
Yeah, I think this is the problem of a number of fields that are related to the Christian faith, because there's so much information online that it's almost disorienting. So sometimes I refer to it as the Wikipedia culture. We can pop online and we can just look any topic up, no matter what it is, and we have this synopsis, right? We end up knowing a little about a lot of topics, but we don't know a lot about a little, in the sense that very few of us have expertise in order to really dive into a subject and realize how deep that well can go. But we feel like we know the subject because the Wikipedia article gave us a synopsis. And I think I have coworkers who are philosophers, who are scientists, and they also feel this struggle with this type of idea where there are facts that may be true at face value that might be misconstrued if you don't know the whole story. The history of the Bible is a long one. Actually, my colleague Andy and I, this last summer, we took a trip over to Egypt and we started filming a project that we're going to be releasing at the end of February, beginning of March, called Can I Trust the Bible? Where it's a 2-part series where we go through not just common objections, but we actually went to some of the locations where some of our earliest Christian manuscripts and some of the manuscripts of some of the Gnostic Gospels were found. And we try to tell those stories. And one of the things we actually do talk about is what you just mentioned, missing verses of the Bible. And we try to tackle that because that's an objection that we hear. People, and they go to their 1611 King James or whatever, and they open it up and they say, this reads like this, but then I go to an NIV or an ESV or an NASB, and all of a sudden there's missing verses. So the way I put it often is we have so much with the history of the Bible, because this book is not just one book, but 66 books. 66 books written over a period of 1,600 years on 3 different continents by close to 40 different authors in 3 different languages, 2 major languages, Greek and Hebrew, and 1 minor language, Aramaic. And so it's a library of books. So we have a lot going on. And then we have copies for the last 2,000 years, more copies of the Bible than we have for any other ancient document from that time period. And so we have to be careful in the sense that there's a lot going on, but at the exact same time, the benefit of all that information is that it's not that hard, although you might have to do a little bit of digging to figure out, okay, there's a verse in my King James that's not in my modern Bible. Is that a case of someone taking something out? And when? If we look into the data, we actually find it's the opposite. Because of the manuscript tradition, we know that certain readings got introduced into the manuscripts for good reasons, the vast majority of the time. Most of the time, it's because we have 4 Gospels. And so a scribe who maybe has just copied an entire copy of Matthew and has that kind of fresh in his brain because he spent a year copying Matthew. Now he's coming to Mark. He starts copying Mark. And so he's reading similar stories and he's copying these sayings of Jesus, and he's familiar with some of them because Matthew also tells the same sayings. And he starts to finish the sentences from his recollection of them from Jesus in Matthew. That happens. That kind of carrying over of certain phrases, of similar sayings, similar stories. And so because we can pinpoint these things because of the manuscript tradition, because of the textual tradition of the Bible, we know that it's not a case of, okay, when we look at a modern Bible, there are missing verses, who took that out and when? But it's actually a case of we're able to pinpoint when that happened, sometimes why that happened and where that happened, And then we are able to say, okay, we know that, say, this verse is not original to Matthew. Do we then reverse the entire book of Matthew? No, because that chapter and verse system, although it wasn't original to Matthew, it's standardized at this point. We have first memorization, we
Correct.
have commentaries, we have all sorts of things, books. So we don't just take it out and reverse the entire Bible. What we end up doing is, the vast majority of the time, you'll say, see Matthew. I'm just coming up with a verse off the top of my head. It's not a real verse. I can give you a real one. John chapter 5, verse 4. There is no John chapter 5, verse 4. Okay, so when we figure out that John did not write John chapter 5, verse 4, and a later scribe, probably in the 4th century, wrote it, what we then do is we write John chapter 5, verse 3, and then it's going to go John chapter 5, verse 5. But you'll notice 4 is going to be either in small brackets, and there's going to be a citation at the bottom of the page which explains what's going on there, or there's going to be some other indication that this verse isn't just disappearing, it's a verse that wasn't original to the text, and so it's being removed for the sake of clarity, not for the sake of confusion or for some nefarious purpose.
Yeah.
But the fact that it's been taken out in the modern version is evidence that we can have an incredible level of confidence that we know what the original authors wrote, because we're able to trace that back and realize that those particular verses were not written by the author, because we're both able to look at this long history of data and because we're transparent with the text.